You've probably opened your phone today without deciding to. Not because you wanted to, not because there was something urgent. You just did it. And then 4 minutes later, you were watching a dog fail to catch a frisbee. And somewhere in the back of your head, a small voice whispered, "I was supposed to be working." That voice isn't guilt. That's not weakness. That's your brain doing something extraordinarily sophisticated and almost entirely against your interests. Here's what nobody tells you about discipline. The people who seem to have it aren't fighting harder than you. They're not running on superhuman fuel you weren't given. The difference is architectural. Their brains have been rewired, deliberately or by accident, to find discipline less painful than the alternative. And that rewiring has a name: the override method. Not because it sounds cool, because that's literally what it does. It overrides the part of your brain that defaults to comfort and replaces the signal. This is not about motivation. Motivation is weather. It comes and goes, and you have zero control over it. This is not about willpower either. Willpower depletes by noon, and if you've been relying on it, that explains a lot about how your evenings look. What we're covering today is something quieter and more permanent. A shift in how your brain assigns value to effort itself. 7 mechanisms, each one targeting a different layer of why discipline feels impossible. One of them, number 5, is the one I'd ask you not to skip. It's the mechanism that makes all the others work. Don't leave before we get there. All right, here's what's actually going on. Your brain is not broken. If you've spent any time failing to be more disciplined, you've developed a quiet suspicion that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It isn't. You're running software that was never designed for the world you're living in. Your brain operates on a reward prediction system. Everything you do voluntarily is because your brain ran a cost-benefit analysis and decided the expected reward outweighs the expected discomfort. This process is unconscious. You don't feel it happening. You just feel the result, a pull toward something or a resistance against it. The problem is this system was calibrated for scarcity, where rest was survival strategy, and doing nothing was sometimes the most efficient option. Then we invented smartphones and 1,000 other systems engineered by very intelligent people to hijack your reward circuitry and make you press buttons repeatedly. Roy Baumeister at Florida State spent decades studying ego depletion, the finding that self-control draws from a limited cognitive pool. Every decision, every moment of resistance draws from that pool. By afternoon, most people are running on fumes. Your brain, being efficient, starts routing around expensive choices. So the question isn't, how do I want it more? The question is, how do I change what my brain considers worth doing? That's the override method. Before we get into it, drop a comment. What's the one thing you keep trying to be disciplined about and keep failing? I'm genuinely curious, and I'd bet real money it fits perfectly into what we're about to cover. 1. The friction architecture. Your brain will always take the path with less friction. Always. This isn't laziness, it's efficiency. B.J. Fogg at Stanford found something that should change how you think about discipline entirely. The behavior that happens most often is not the behavior you want most. It's the behavior that's easiest to start. The person who puts running shoes next to their bed is more likely to run than the person who wants it more but keeps their shoes in the closet. Not because they're more disciplined, because they changed the terrain. Practical move. Map your friction points. Every step between you and the behavior you want is a door your tired brain has to open. Remove as many as possible. Simultaneously, add friction to what you don't want. Log out of social media. Delete the apps you open unconsciously. You're not relying on willpower. You're redesigning the building. The moment discipline becomes architecture, you stop needing motivation to maintain it. 2. The identity inversion. Here's why most attempts at discipline collapse within 2 weeks. People try to change behavior without changing the story they tell about themselves. I'm trying to exercise more, versus I'm someone who exercises. The difference isn't grammar, it's neurology. Psychologist Daryl Bem's self-perception theory showed that humans don't just act based on who they believe they are. They come to believe they are based on how they narrate their actions. Your brain constantly searches for evidence to confirm your self-concept. Tell yourself you're undisciplined, and it files every failure, every skipped workout, every late start. It's not lying, it's just extremely selective. The inversion? Update your identity first, let behavior follow. Pick one behavior you want and narrate it as who you already are. Not, I'm trying to read more, I'm a reader. Then collect tiny pieces of evidence. One page counts. You're not faking it. You're recognizing how identity formation actually works. Every act in alignment with your claimed identity casts a vote for that person. You don't need a landslide. You need a consistent majority. 3. The motivation trap. Most people have this backwards. They believe motivation comes first, then action. So they wait. Wait to feel ready. Wait for the right moment. Wait until they want it badly enough. This is equivalent to waiting for your appetite to appear before you decide to ever eat again. What research actually shows, action precedes motivation. The feeling of wanting to continue almost always appears after you've started, not before. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman has explained this through dopamine timing. The anticipatory dopamine that creates motivation during an activity is only triggered after you initiate the behavior. You have to start before you feel like starting. The practical application? Lower your initiation threshold so radically that starting becomes nearly automatic. 2 minutes of writing becomes 20. 2 minutes of studying becomes an hour. The brain gets the signal from starting, then wants to continue. The discipline you're looking for isn't waiting on the other side of motivation. It's waiting on the other side of starting. 4. The compound discomfort principle. There's a specific discomfort that disciplined people read completely differently than everyone else. Most people experience resistance before a hard task as a signal to stop, a warning, evidence they're not ready. What high performers have learned, almost universally, is to reframe that same feeling as a green light. Not because they've eliminated discomfort, because they've learned it's not a warning about danger, it's a signal that growth is imminent. Carol Dweck's research at Stanford documented this systematically. People with growth mindset don't enjoy difficulty more. They've built a cognitive frame where difficulty means they're in the right place. But here's what most summaries miss. The reframe doesn't happen through affirmations. It happens through accumulation. Each completed act of discipline changes your brain's threat assessment of the next one. You are building a track record your amygdala uses to recalibrate risk. The task that felt impossible 6 weeks ago barely registers now. Practical move? Do one uncomfortable thing each day. Small enough to survive, hard enough to register. Not for the outcome, for the recalibration. Have you ever pushed through resistance and been surprised by how it felt on the other side? Tell me in the comments, because which mechanism you already have and which one you're missing shows up exactly in your answer. 5. The override switch, the one that makes everything else work. This is the one I told you not to skip. It sounds almost disappointingly simple, but it determines whether any of the other mechanisms will stick. Without this, everything else is a technique. With it, everything becomes permanent. Here it is. The override switch is the moment you learn to create a pause between stimulus and a response. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and founded logotherapy, wrote what became one of the most cited sentences in psychology. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Most people read this as philosophy. It's neuroscience. When your alarm goes off and you feel the pull to hit snooze, there is a measurable period. Researchers estimate 0.2 to 2 seconds, during which you are not yet committed to a response. Your brain has registered the stimulus. The default is queued up, but it hasn't executed yet. That gap is the override switch. Discipline, at its most fundamental level, is not about the actions you take. It's about who gets to decide which actions you take. When you operate without the pause, your brain's default system decides. When you find the pause, even 1 second, you decide. Here's what this looks like in practice. You're about to open your phone at 10 p.m. when you know you should sleep. The pull is there. The default is loading. The override switch is this. You notice it. You name it. This is the pull. Not, I shouldn't do this. That's resistance, which usually loses. Just, this is the pull. You're not fighting anything. You're observing it. That moment of observation interrupts the automatic sequence. And in the interrupt, choice becomes available. You may still pick up the phone, but you chose to. It didn't choose you. The practice. For 1 week, every time you notice yourself about to do something automatic, pause for 1 breath. Name what you're feeling. Then choose. You don't have to choose differently. You just have to choose consciously. Each time you do this, you strengthen the neural pathway between stimulus and deliberate response. The pause gets easier to find, then faster, then instinctive. The person who has done this for 6 months doesn't feel more disciplined. They feel different, like someone who used to be pulled by a current and can now choose to swim with it or against it. This is what the override method is actually about. The quiet daily practice of inserting yourself between what your brain wants automatically and what you actually choose. Everything else we've covered becomes sustainable only when this is in place. 6. The streak reframe. At some point, you will miss a day. I'm not being pessimistic. I'm being accurate. And what happens in the 24 hours after that miss will determine more about your long-term discipline than almost anything else. Most people treat a broken streak as a verdict, evidence they are, again, the person they feared. And then, because identity is predictive, they act like that person. 1 missed day becomes 3. 3 becomes a week. The reframe. Instead of a continuous streak that can be broken, you have a pattern that absorbs isolated exceptions. The goal is not never miss. The goal is never miss twice in a row. That 1-sentence shift, backed by research from behavioral economist Katie Milkman, has measurable effects on long-term habit retention. A single miss is no longer a verdict. It's a data point. Your only job when you miss, return the next day. Not to make up for it. Just return. The return is the discipline. It's harder and more important than any individual day of a streak, because you're doing it in the emotional aftermath of perceived failure, exactly when your default screams loudest. 7. The reward reassignment. Your brain will never sustainably do something it doesn't find rewarding. This is not philosophy, it's biology. The basal ganglia, most responsible for habit formation, cannot encode a behavior as automatic unless it's associated with a reward signal. Remove the reward and the loop breaks. Most people try to run the behavior loop without the reward, relying on willpower to compensate. This works for approximately 2 to 3 weeks, which is, not coincidentally, exactly how long most habit attempts last. The fix? Deliberately engineer the internal reward your brain receives from disciplined behavior, rather than waiting for external outcomes that take months to arrive. At the completion of any disciplined behavior, pause for 30 seconds. No phone, no next task, just notice the internal state. Name it. Your brain is listening for the reward signal. Give it one. Over time, your brain associates the feeling of effort, of override, with the state that follows it. The reward moves from external to internal, from delayed to immediate. The discipline becomes self-sustaining, not because you're stronger, but because you gave your brain the data it needed to want to continue. The person who applies this isn't someone who conquered their nature. They're someone who learned to read it clearly enough to work with it. The brain that used to pull toward comfort still pulls. The resistance still exists. The tired afternoons still happen. But the pause is there. The identity is there. The architecture is there. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, the default shifts. Not because discipline was forced from outside, but because the brain was shown, through accumulation, that effort is not the enemy. Discipline isn't about doing hard things. It's about becoming someone for whom certain hard things are no longer hard. That transformation doesn't happen in a moment of inspiration. It happens in the 7 seconds between the alarm and the snooze button, 7,000 times over. You just learned how to use those 7 seconds. If any of this shifted something, you know what to do. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of thinking. No pressure.